How's it going, ladies and Bruces? I'm Bobby Sixkilla and welcome back to Deluge. You'll be happy to know that the last recording, actually you probably already know because it would have gone up yesterday, but the last recording did work. Hooray! It did actually record the audio and everything went good and everything is good, yay. Alright, let's carry on, shall we? Can you at least tell me the name of the author? No, I have no idea. Considering the circumstances, I didn't want to reveal what book I was looking for. Clearly this was an unforeseen flaw in my plan. You're looking for a book of which you don't even know the name of the author. That's very foolish of you, Abe. Foolish and a little suspicious. Anyway, thanks for wasting my time. I have to leave now. I'll tell the receptionist you'll be following shortly. With a restrained wave of her hand, she exited the room. And I continued my hunt. After ascertaining that I'd been through each and every bookcase, I started anew, just to be certain, when suddenly I heard a door open, followed by a loud shuffle. Before I could even turn around, a booming voice rang out. Great to see young people take an interest in the art of politics. I turned to see an older gentleman who, apart from the distinct fragrance of liquor that surrounded him, appeared impeccable. And immediately I knew who I was dealing with. It was as though he emanated a certain aura that I could sense even before he addressed me. This must be him, the man of whom Emma told me every rumour. The illustrious Leopold, Marquis of Abbot. This library is the greatest resource we have. It's sad so few people find their way here. Is there anything I can help you with? I saw no reason to lie to him at the time, as I knew he wasn't exactly partial to the church's dealings. I'm looking for the appendix to the theological inquiries into the Church of Abbot. Instantly his demeanour changed. He let out a short, throaty laugh, and I could detect a captivated twinkle appear in his eyes. The inquiries into the Church of Abbot, you say? I believe I've heard that name before. He looked over his shoulder. I suggest we go for a drink, you and I. Somewhere where we can talk in private. Indeed. Good plan. So I saw you come in with Kuiper's daughter. She's a fine catch, that girl. Be wary of her father, though. He coughed out a dry chuckle. Oh, I remember what it was like to be young. Between the two of us, some say I haven't changed much since those days. He scratched his beard with an agonized gesture. Pretty woman will always be my Achilles heel. So I've been told. Leopold had chosen a table away from the other patrons. You're 18, right? I nodded. Let me order you a beer. He signaled the bartender by holding up 2 fingers. Anyway, about that document you're looking for. I'm sorry to tell you it's been lent out. You're wasting your time searching. Lent out? That's right, the appendix has been removed, as they say in medicine. But tell me, what were you planning on doing with that thing? Give it to your girlfriend? Not at all, I need it for a school project. Oh, that's a sign of great ingenuity. It's an interesting piece. It isn't requested much. I'd say people had all but forgotten about it. But then you came along. You mentioned it had been lent out. Lent out, yes. It has. He let out a long sigh. It's been lent out to me, to be precise. I was overcome with confusion. To you? I figured your girlfriend would have known, considering her father's position. She's not my... She really had you on a wild goose chase looking for things that weren't there. She didn't know what I was looking for. This comment appeared to put him at ease. That's good, very good. Stay vigil. You don't have to tell the ladies everything. Keep them guessing. You're a stronger man than I. Then he bent forward and lowered his voice discreetly. You must have heard the story, Abe. It was about a year ago. There was a guy who we employed to do our garden on Sundays. Jan was his name. Jan wasn't from here, you know, but more importantly, he was a cigar smoker. My wife doesn't let me smoke in the house anymore, so we'd often sit on the patio outside and smoke together. I don't work my people too hard. You need to take your time. Enjoy life. He winked. Please don't do that again. Anyway, I was having a lot of trouble with your father-in-law, Kuiper, back then. Sometimes I would vent about it against Jan, and that's when he told me about the church inquiry. He'd been conducting some private research of his own, and he had reasons to believe that the document contained compromising information pertaining to the history of the Church of Abbot. Personally, I'm more of a worldly man, but Jan was very much into these theological matters. He was a Catholic, like the priest of his group, so you can figure why he didn't like Kuiper too much. As I had access to the council library, I promised I'd retrieve the appendix document for him. He suggested it contained enough information to cause a national scandal, that it would take down Kuiper for good. But it didn't. A self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. Well, he's still here, isn't he? You should know. I'm a selfish man. I went to the council to retrieve the document, but I declined to give it to Jan. I kept it in my briefcase, as I had my own plans with it. And I had it with me when the whole of Sanford House affair occurred. You mean you lost it? The document you lost at Sanford House is the appendix to the church inquiries? Shh, quiet down. I never lost it, it was stolen. It was all a ruse conjured up by these church people. I may have been a bit loose-lipped that day when I found the document. You know, after a long day at the council, I like to come down here to drink a few glasses. I may have boasted my find here and there. Not much later, a call came in that our party, AIR, would be entertaining a wealthy donor that night. Kuiper was happy to provide Sanford House the most exquisite property in town for the occasion. They wanted me to come right away. I should have known better, but I was in the best of spirits, so of course I attended. And they knew all my preferences. There was liquor and female entertainment, and somewhere during the night I must have blacked out. In Sanford House of all places, beautiful, stately Sanford House. Did you know that my clan used to own that manor? It was a residence to the lords of the Isle whenever we visited Abbot, but my great-great-grandfather sold it to the Kuiper family right after the evacuation. He was hoping the church would take good care of it, that they wouldn't let it fall to ruin. I figured he was right. Ever since the reclamation, we've been trying to buy it back. First my father, then me, but to no avail. That snake Kuiper knows how much we want it, and then he uses it in such a humiliating way to orchestrate my downfall. My position within AIR has become precarious due to this whole affair. As a democratically elected representative, they cannot remove me from my position right now. However, I doubt they'll keep me in the party when elections come. And that Jan guy, whatever happened to him? Jan, he left shortly thereafter. One of his friends said something terrible happened to him, you know. A guy named Michael got killed on one of the farms. Most workers from his group returned to their homesteads after that incident, never to return. I reckon they'd seen enough of this place. Anyway, I never had the chance to look into that document. To be honest, I had all but forgotten about it until I found you two snooping about the council library. Your safest bet is that Kuiper still has it, if he hasn't burnt it by now. You'll probably have to pry it from his cold, dead hands. I apologise, I'm a man of many flaws. I should have known women would spell my demise, those heavenly creatures. Life's a feast, you should enjoy it while you're young. You're a terrible person. But thank you anyway. On my way home, I went by the town store to buy some salmon for dinner. Although the selection of produce was predictably basic, they somehow managed to consistently maintain a quality supply of fresh fish. After briskly searing the salmon in a pan, I headed up to my room, intending to finally enjoy a quiet evening, but fate clearly had something different in mind. Ina? Who let you in? Your father did. He was on his way out when I got here, said I could wait until you were back. So how'd the investigation go? You got the document? Have you been spying on me? I told her about my meeting with the Marquis, how he'd been notified of the appendix existence, and how the church had conned him into losing both the document and his reputation. After I was done explaining, I caught Ina staring into the distance as though 1,000 cogs were turning in her brain. So Leopold's gardener, Jan, was a friend of the worker that was killed. Yes, a colleague. I feel that may hold some significance. No shit. We'll have to try and get a hold of Jan, but before that, we should see if we can extract the appendix from John Kuiper. What? What makes you think Kuiper hasn't gotten rid of it by now? With Kuiper, you can never be sure. Her voice sounded strangely muffled, as though she were chewing gum. The document holds historical significance to him. If there's one thing the church is keen on, it's preservation. But in the end, there's only one way to find out. We'll have to break into the church offices and see if we can find it. Do you have time this coming Thursday? No, I'm taking Eureka and May to the shore after school. I was so taken aback by the bluntness with which she proposed the felonious deed that I was happy to have a valid excuse. You're going to the shore with 2 girls? I figured inviting me along never came to mind. Ina, let's do it Saturday, after you're done with work. Anyway, it's late and I'm dead tired. Thanks for dinner. You should know for next time that I'm not too fond of seafood. She was already out the door by the time that I realised she'd finished more than 2/3 of my plate. Shit. No dinner for us then. Guess we're just going to bed. The sun was blindingly bright that day. It shone its lazy beams onto our carriage, which was empty save for the 3 of us. To get to the beach, we had to ascend a small flight of stairs, up over the concrete embankment that shielded the lower-lying inlands from the waters of the lake. So what do you think? Amazing, isn't it? It's so big you can't see the other side. Our very own sea. Rika sniffed. A sea, you call it. All I smell is rotten fish. I held my nose up to the air, but you couldn't detect anything out of the ordinary. May continued speaking, unfazed by Rika's snide remarks. And isn't the sun nice? It's as warm as a summer's day. Rika, can we have ice cream later? I don't think there'll be a vendor at this time of the year. But we can eat something in the village when the sun begins to set. May seemed entirely too excited to listen to her friend's words. This outing to a neighbouring town had sparked a childlike enthusiasm in her, the intensity of which made me wonder how often she'd actually left the confines of Abbotsford. So first things first. The coach would only let me skip practice if I did a 30-minute workout down here. Anyone joining me? May began shuffling awkwardly. You going swimming? In October? I think I'll pass. Suit yourself. Rika bounced toward the shoreline. Then in a graceful motion she removed her dress, revealing a modest sports swimsuit below before wading into the lake. A perfect halo of ripples propagated out over its glass-like surface. You should come in, the water's lovely. You could take a shower afterwards to get the stench off you. I'd rather play on the beach. Rika waved one more time, and then she was gone, swimming parallel to the coastline in skilled butterfly technique. May turned her attention to me. I'm not much of a swimmer. They tried to teach me when I was very young, but they said I never took to it. Were you afraid of water? I'm not sure. Somewhere shallow is fine, like a swimming pool, but I wouldn't want to swim somewhere that couldn't see the bottom. I looked over toward the water, where Rika was still tirelessly continuing her athletics. There was a beautiful symmetry in her strokes, and the way that her endless hair, which she had failed to tie into a bun, trailed behind her, like a black veil, gave her an otherworldly appearance. I stood mesmerized by the sight, as it evoked images of mermaids and nymph-like beings. Rika's wonderful, isn't she? She's alright. Rika is projected to take first place at the regional championships this winter. It's the nationals after that. The whole town will be cheering her on. At that moment, Rika dove down, continuing underwater for a good while until she appeared again far out, waving at us, her head almost invisible against the indigo waters of the lake. She can stay underwater for more than 5 minutes. Isn't that amazing? I remember when we were small, we would hold breath-holding contests. Rika would always beat me. At times she'd hold her breath for so long that I began to panic, begging and pleading her to start breathing again. She does have a sophisticated sense of humour, doesn't she? May giggled. Rika is the pride of the town. I'm delighted to be her friend. Most girls around here look up to Rika, though they don't always let it shine through. Where is she anyway? I had to admit I hadn't been paying attention. I'm not sure, probably still underwater. We stood and looked out over the lake for what felt like an eternity, but the waters remained without a trace. Rika? Rika? If she truly had gone under, there was now only a narrow window of time before it was too late. Rika? 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 But the lake lay death-like before us. She's been under for more than 10 minutes. No one can survive that long. Impossible. She's an excellent swimmer. Rika, stop playing games. It's not funny anymore. And that's when the gravity of the situation truly hit me. Like a lead cylinder, impact with my stomach at 20 knots per hour. If Rika truly had gone under, there was no hope she'd ever emerge again. It was over. Finished. What was intended to have been a pleasurable beach trip had turned into the darkest possible tragedy. What should we do? She isn't coming back. We'd better call the emergency services? That's a great idea. Quick! As I took out my phone to dial the emergency number, I noticed that my fingers had gone completely numb. But then... look, in the distance! I saw it immediately, a black dot, clearly discernible, far out in the lake. It was rapidly travelling in our direction. It's gotta be her. How could we not... Rika, she's back! Occasionally, a dark-haired figure stepped out from the waves and slipped into her summer dress. Where were you, Rika? We thought you'd disappeared. Oh, I apologise. There's an interesting geological feature out there in the water that I felt like examining. It's a black granite rock, hidden just beneath the surface. At times you can see little parts of it sticking out of the waves. A rock? Instantly, May seemed to have forgotten about our recent crisis, completely captivated by Rika's new find. I looked into the distance but saw nothing. There's lots of history surrounding that stone. It used to be a hazard for ships back in the day when this was still a sea. If fishermen hit the rock, it could sink their vessel. Over the centuries, it racked up quite a death count, and eventually it became so notorious it was given a name, the Humming Stone. Because it gives you a hummer. You crash your boat into it, it sinks, and then you have to suck a dick. It was said that strange creatures lived within the rock, who brought forth a mysterious whirring sound. They were dangerous too, as they feasted on the corpses of sailors that drowned there. Ridiculous folk beliefs, of course, but these things do amuse me. I wanted to ascertain if the stone was still there. I'm glad you didn't get eaten. Oh, how could you two worry about me? Are you doubting your champion swimmer? Anyone can drown, no matter how good a swimmer you are. Jesus. Elicit and I spent the rest of the afternoon lying in the sun, while May scoured the shoreline for pretty stones. When the sun began to set, we headed up to the nearby town of Rybury. Elicit took us to a small cafeteria where they served locally produced fish cakes. You like them? I nodded eagerly. Though fried in gratuitous batter, I could tell the fish was fresh and of excellent quality. It had a delicate, flaky texture, signifying skilled preparation, unusual for fast food joints like this. May sat chewing reluctantly on a piece of batter. They taste very, local. It's okay if you don't like them, May. I'll order you some potato fritters in a minute. I like the sea, but I don't really care for what's inside. These are made from saltwater cod, you know? They have to sail all the way past the great floodgates to catch them. Is there still a fishing community down there? A very small one. The lake itself is mostly useless for fish, especially now with the quota on eels. But there are a few families that still sail up north. It feels like a fool's errand at times, but I guess it's what they do. To them it's a matter of pride. Adika ordered another round of fish cakes and a plate of fries for May. After you two finish your meal, I want to show you something. Her mouth curled into a promising grin as she held up an innocuous-looking key. You should know by now that I'm very well connected. I mean, we knew that. We followed Rika along the concrete embankment into something that looked like an industrial estate. She held still at one of the buildings, unlocking its heavy metal door. She switched on the lights. Whoa, what is this place? This is where the magic happens. Rybury Pumping Station. As the terrain of the marsh polder lies below sea level, rainwater has nowhere to run off to and will inevitably flood the land. To prevent this from happening, all excess water is led to the station through an extensive system of drainage ditches. A high-tech centrifugal pump lifts up the water and jettisons it out into the lake. My father is deputy to the regional water board. That's how I have access to this place. Though the hall was drafty and uncomfortable, I felt a tingling sense of privilege as I stood above these great machines. This entire building was vital for the well-being of thousands of civilians, and we were fortunate enough to have unmitigated access. I love it here, it's so big. And a little scary. Look, this stairway leads down to the basement where the pumps are. They replaced the machinery just a few years ago. Each pump now has a capacity of 150 tons per minute, which should be plenty for the coming decades. But still, you should realise that whenever you're behind the embankment, you're treading on a former seabed. A small rupture in the concrete embankment would expand quickly, causing all the waters of the lake to flow back in. She let out a compulsive giggle. Isn't that an arousing thought? You're safe while you're on Abbot, of course. This island still lies higher than the surrounding farmlands, though I don't know how long that will last. They say that our town is slowly sinking down into the soil. This place has seen the birth of the marsh polder. It was the first of these stations built, you know. It pumped out the lion's share of the seawater. After the land fell dry, it was a putrid mess. You wouldn't make it far before sinking away into the sludge. People had to wear boots with broadened soles, not unlike modern snowshoes, in order to make their way from town to town. And it wasn't long before the flies came. Swarms of them multiplying rapidly in the former seabed, where they feasted on seaweed and rotten fish. It was the birth of a whole new ecosystem where the fly population went unchecked. They had no natural enemies at the time. The poor inhabitants of Abbot were driven mad, millions and millions of flies descending upon their little town, buzzing through the houses, smashing themselves against the window panes. It didn't take long for the pavements and windowsills to fill up with piles of dead flies. My great aunt still tells tales about how the children would play games with their corpses, stuffing them into each other's school bags or crunching them up into balls with which they held morbid snowball fights. That's disgusting. I agree, but the seabed made for fertile ground. It didn't take long for all kinds of plants to sprout in the newly formed soil, and as their roots spread through the mud, the ground gradually grew steadier to the point where you could traverse it normally on foot. Spiders spun their webs among the countless shrubs, and just as the insect population had initially exploded, now the spiders reigned supreme. engorging themselves upon the endless supply of flies, often catching more than they could eat in a single summer. Rika was smiling with sadistic glee. Many islanders welcomed the arrival of the spiders, as their presence would finally put an end to the nuisance of the flies. But for some, such as my great aunt, who was wary of all things creepy and crawly, the circumstances became all the more dire. I noticed May was cowering silently. Due to the abundant prey, the spiders grew to unnatural sizes. Larger than a human hand, they would hang, legs outstretched with their massive webs. My aunt recounts one traumatizing afternoon when she was sent down to the cellar to retrieve a bowl of cured herring. It was dark down there, and she didn't have a light. She carefully made her way to the large brine-filled barrel that stood far in the back. And then, when she raised the lid, out crept two humongous, hairy... May stood petrified, her eyes open wide. Please stop, Rika. You know these stories frighten me. I'm sorry, May. I forgot how sensitive you are. Rika mumbled some soothing words as she sat and comforted May, though I could tell she was concealing a silent mirth. We played a game of hide and seek and indulged ourselves on May's seemingly endless supply of peppermints. It wasn't long before it turned completely dark outside. Rika let out a theatrical yawn. It's getting late. We should probably be heading home. As I mentioned before, I have some private business to attend to in Rybury. It'll only take a minute. Could you two go on ahead to the railway station and wait for me there? I'll catch up with you in time for the 10 o'clock train. I guess. And as we walked over the embankment, back to the train station, it was as though I could detect a very slight fragrance of burning meat in the air. I figured it must be beachgoers who lit a bonfire, and as I looked out toward the water, I could indeed detect a small fire burning in the distance. On Saturday afternoon, I met up with Ina outside the Ithacus House of Prayer. These are the Church of Abbot's headquarters. Make sure to correct me in the comments, please. They host a worship centre in an adjacent office complex, so the plan is we head in, grab the appendix document, and then we're out again in less than 10 minutes. Is everything clear? Wouldn't that constitute a felony? Sure it does, but I've implemented some safeguards. The church itself is open to visitors until 8 PM, so as long as we're just looking around, we're not breaking any laws. However, they probably keep their valuable documents somewhere inside the administrative offices. As soon as we venture further, we'll be engaging in breaking and entering, which is a crime. Anyway, it's dinner time now. Most clergymen are at home with their families. And if we get caught? We'll tell them that we're high school students who are searching for meaning in their lives. We may get scolded, but then again, they can't go too hard on repentant sinners. Come on, let's go. Try to appear interested in 17th century religious architecture. I'll try. On our way inside, we passed a small booth where a church warden sat. Ina placed some money in the glass donation box that had a prominent place near the entrance. The man nodded it at us. The church itself was deserted save for an organist who was rehearsing for tomorrow's service. This is it, the devotional heart of our town. I'm afraid there isn't much to see in here apart from the organ. The history of this place goes back a long time, you know. It used to be a Catholic church with far more ornate interior. But during the Reformation, all the statues were smashed and the decorations were removed. The people of Abbotsford practiced an austere devotion, where large displays of ecclesiastical wealth are frowned upon. But that doesn't mean the church isn't wealthy, you know. They sure are, considering all the properties they own. They just don't feel the need to parade their riches. Anyway, it's time for us to make our move. If we stay in here for too long, the warden will grow suspicious. Ina grabbed my arm and led me toward a non-distinct wooden door hidden away in the walls of the church. From her pocket she produced an elongated iron wire, the end of which she had carefully bent to a small hook. Quietly she inserted it into the door's keyhole. You appear to be a seasoned burglar. Not really, but I've been looking it up on the internet. Man, I'm so glad you can look everything up on the internet, right? How to build a nuclear reactor, how to pick locks, lock picks. These old locks should be simple, even a child could open them. With a muted click, the door gave way. The church annex was dimly lit. Attempting carefully not to make a sound, we descended the tall staircase. Remember, we're just looking for a youth pastor to talk to. We're seeking inner enlightenment. Do wayward souls carry lockpicks? Let's just maintain the door was slightly ajar. There should be 2 officers downstairs. How do you know so much about the layout of this place? The stairs led into a dark hallway. Not the most cheerful work environment. Ina pressed her ear up to one of the doors. After confirming it was empty, we entered the room. Ooh, nice. All these books. Looks like we've struck gold. This must be John Kuiper's study. Immediately, we started browsing through the piles of paperwork. As expected, Kuiper's library was mostly theological in nature. It was like searching for a needle in a needle stack. Church Dogmatics, Volume 12. Compendium of Theological Hermeneutics. The Belgic Confession. Why is nothing kept in order? They should teach this man a system. His daughter's pretty tidy, I'd say. I bet she takes after her mother. We continued searching. Ina appeared to be growing more frantic by the minute. Are you sure the Marquis wasn't lying to you? He doesn't have a good reputation, you know. I bet he was drunk at the time. I can't deny that. And even then, who says Kuiper didn't just burn the documents after he obtained them? There's no use keeping them around if they're so incriminating. But you said... I froze. For over Ina's frustrated whispers, I suddenly detected a strange noise that was coming from the room next to ours. It was a hesitant gurgling that burbled just within the audible range. There was something distinctly guttural to it. I think it's a giant slime. Sounds like a slime from King's Field. I pressed my ear up against the wall, trying to get a better gauge of the sound, when suddenly... There, I've got it. Appendix to the Theological Inquiries. Let's get out of here. She clasped her hand to her mouth, realizing suddenly how loud her voice had sounded in the deathly silent office. Then she resumed in a hushed tone. It was in his desk drawer, which was childishly simple to break open. That's great, Ina. But listen, can you hear that sound? She grew quiet. There, listen closely. It seems to be coming from the room next door. Come on, let's check it out. We exited the room. On her tiptoes, Ina headed toward the adjacent door. There seemed to be someone there. I can hear a voice, so it sounds heavily distorted, as though in agony. Come on, Ina, we should leave. We have what we came for. Just let me listen for a second longer. I'd love to get a recording. What do you think you're doing down here? Ina jumped up, almost dropping her papers in the process. A figure had appeared at the end of the hallway and was angrily making its way toward us. Almost mechanically, Ina called out her alibi. We're looking to speak to a youth pastor. But she'd already grabbed me by the arm, dragging me up the flight of stairs, through the door that led to the main chapel. And we sped walked past the warden who, though clearly oblivious to the whole affair, stared after us in amazement as we set off over the town square at Olympic speeds. Ina led me on detours in order to shake off her imagined pursuers. It took us more than half an hour to get to school. We sped through alleyways, jumped a hedge, spent time hiding behind a dumpster, cut through the woods until we eventually reached the school grounds via the east gate. Once Ina had ascertained that we weren't being followed, we entered the building. Though my newfound profession had immeasurably increased my general fitness over the past weeks, I was unaccustomed to the sudden outburst of physical exercise that had just been demanded of me. Fully at the end of my tether, I collapsed into a chair. They really had it out for us there. They must have some hidden secrets for them to be so wary of visitors. Well, we were trespassing. Ina, who appeared rather unfazed by our close escape, took out her captured documents and began paging through them intently. Addendum to the Journal of Reverend Thomas W. H. H. Backer. Monday, 28th of September, 1856. Due to the extraordinary circumstances that have arisen during my inquiry into the proceedings of the Church of Abbot, which will be elucidated upon further herein. These pages shall serve as an appendix to the journal that I have submitted prior to the presbytery of the Low Countries. Given my circumstances, I do not feel at liberty during my visit to commit to paper these occurrences that I've witnessed upon the Isle, the sheer distressing and even blasphemous nature of which will immediately become apparent to the reader. Ina cleared her throat. As described in the paragraphs previously divulged, my initial welcome and contact with the Reverend John Kuiper was cordial and without notable event. It was not until the third day after my arrival that I became aware of certain behavioural eccentricities that within both the Kuiper family and the community of Abbot at large. Though not immediately apparent, this anomaly manifested itself as a creeping awareness, a palpable sensation, as though I was never fully alone during my stay on the Isle. Wherever I went, there was a mystifying presence that gradually grew more discernible. It could take the form of a muted giggle or a glimpse of black hair dashing away in my peripheral vision, but whenever I tried to confront Hendrika with her strange behaviour, She would act coy, evasive even, avoiding my glances. And there was more, slightly alleviating the annoyance of the constant espionage, though nonetheless unsettling. There was a peculiar habitual occurrence within the town that immediately drew my attention. For every evening after dinner, when I would retreat to my room for prayer and mediation, I noticed that the entirety of the island became shrouded and deathly quiet, as though every living being had disappeared from the face of the earth. The streets below would be without stir, and even within the manse itself I could detect no trace of the Kuiper family. These absences would always start before 7 and never lasted for less than an hour. After picking up on the regularity of these intervals, I would utilize them to embark upon walks around the desolate town, as even my dark-haired sentinel appeared to be absent during this period of time. It was on Wednesday evening during one of these walks that I first noticed a distinct fragrance of smoke coming from the dunes. With my interest piqued, I cautiously headed in the direction where the scent came from. As I drew closer, I ascertained that it originated not from the dunes themselves, but from the beach beyond, whereupon a great bonfire had been ignited. I had already entertained the notion that the inhabitants of Abbot had held a covert observance in the evening hours, and my heart jumped as I finally beheld a large crowd of people that had gathered upon the shore. With the bright flames casting elongated shadows over the chalky sand, the assembly made for a haunting scene. For upon the bonfire lay the carcass of a sheep not raised above the flames but placed directly upon them, so that a great fire emanated from its carcass, sending smoke and the stench of burning flesh up into the sky, to be swept away by the evening breeze. Taking shelter in the dunes as to not be discovered, I continued to observe the haunting spectacle. Though most of the winds blew out over the sea, some of them blew out over the land, and although these gusts were infrequent and far between, during those times I could clearly make out Kuiper's voice. He was preaching a sermon upon the shore, his voice drenched in a fervour and devotion that had been absent during that observance that I had attended on Sunday morning. And just as I arrived, the Reverend led the congregation in prayer, and the people spoke in unison, so that it was clear for me to hear these words that are commonly referred to as the Song of the Sea. The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains are also drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them, they sank to the bottom as a stone, and in the greatness of thine excellency thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou sentest forth thy wrath which consumed them as stubble? And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together, the flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. After this communal prayer, the Reverend resumed his sermon, and he spoke in enthused vehemence. What I could make out from his words alluded to the most ancient parts of the Pentateuch, and even to arcane Talmudic texts that are completely foreign to Christian scripture, and I hear him utter blasphemous monikers such as these belongings to the great serpent Leviathan, and he spoke the name with such exalted reverence that it were as though he were heaping praise upon the beast. And he spoke more blasphemous and unholy names, many of which I had not seen in text, religious or profane, and a name that I distinctly recall crossing his lips was that of a certain Lotan, and he described Lotan as infinite, as being without end. And during his sermon the carcass burnt, and it burnt fast and hot, for it had much fat in it. And when the carcass had been reduced to ashes, 2 members of the congregation came with shovels and swept the ash into the direction of the sea. And as they swept the burning remains toward the water, Reverend Kuiper raised his hands much like he'd done on that tempestuous afternoon when I arrived 4 days ago, and he spoke a blessing unto the waters. And it was at that moment that the sea rippled in frantic rage, and a large wave rose up over the shore and swept away the remains of the charred carcass, which I deduced must have been a burnt offering, as was custom in Noah's days. And thus the beach was wholly clean again, and there was no evidence for the morning tide to lay bare. The Reverend led the crowd in solemn chant. He who coils through immeasurable depths, he who traverses impenetrable darkness, Lotan, Lotan, eel without end. And they repeated this incantation many times, but I had become nauseated in my stomach from the decadent display of depravity that I'd witnessed upon the shore that night. Highly distraught, I returned to the manse. And with that, we're going to wrap this episode up here, because we're out of time for today. Cliffhanger, because someone just broke our window. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks again, Alfie, and I'll see you in the next one.